I'm the Human Relations Director for the City of Anderson, and I welcome each and every one of you to the 38th Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Celebration today. And today is actually 2018 marks the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's death, but it also marks the 50th anniversary for the Fair Housing Act. And fair housing, it is the law, and basically it gives people choice as to where they want to live. And it also requires that they have safe and decent housing. So if you want to know more about your fair housing rights, I do have a booth up on the second floor. Let's see, Kamaya, am I on the third floor? Third floor. Third floor ballroom, the Human Relations Department has a table, and basically the Human Relations Department helps to protect civil rights, as well as, like I said, it in 4 different areas helps to protect civil rights, so employment, public housing, fair housing, public accommodation, and employment and education. So those are the areas that we cover, and again, if you want more information about that, please visit us up on the 3rd floor in the ballroom. And with all that being said, I am going to turn this program over to the lovely mistresses of ceremony.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor for both me and Mimi to be here today to present to you. Usually each year they only have one mistress of ceremony, so not only do you get one this year, but you get 2. So that's kind of like an additional bonus for you all. Through this process, it's actually been wonderful getting to know Mimi. We've had lunch together. She shared her food with me, and anyone who shares food with me, you're automatically my friend. So like we're best friends now because she shared her food with me. So it's just been wonderful. So we're just happy to be here. We're happy to be presenting today. Before we get started, I do want to give a couple interesting facts about today, and some of them Tammy already mentioned. This year does mark the 50th year that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. It also marks the 38th annual year for this particular celebration, so that's also wonderful that Anderson's continuously been doing this for the last 38 years. It also marks the 40th anniversary for the Anderson Community Choir, which is a wonderful achievement. So let's give them a round of applause for their 40th anniversary as well.
Right on! Good afternoon. They were incredible. 40 years of Anderson Community Choir, joined by the Anderson musicians. So let's give them another round of applause. They were incredible. It's hard to follow that, I might say. And I want to thank each of you as we pulled into the, really snowy weather here. It's awesome to be home. And it's wonderful. I think thanks to Reverend Benny, I think this is my 6th year to be here, 5th or 6th year, and I'm really proud to be here. It's an honor to be here with the mayor. Always good to see you, Senator Lannon, Representative Austin, and all of the incredible leaders that you have here in Anderson. I want to say, though, which I think it meant even more today as I watched the Anderson University students march in with the flags. And the flags from the countries from where students at AU come from. And we do have to remember, we are a country of immigrants, and every country we come from means something. And that's what Dr. Martin Luther King, 50 years ago, after his incredible life was cut so tragically short, in his last speech in Memphis, Dr. King talked about the moments in history he most wanted to witness. He wanted to have witnessed seeing the Israelites escaped Egypt, from seeing Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. But what he wanted to do, and what he said he wanted to do, was live in his time, in the middle of the 20th century, because it was a time of enormous change. And as we just heard a little bit ago from Tammy, just a week after that horrible assassination, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, legislation that today is considered the final piece of the landmark Civil Rights Act of the 60s. Today, and in 1968, where you live, where you build your home, determined the quality of your kids' education, the job opportunities available to you and your family, your access to health care services, and so much more. In 1968, communities of color were segregated, cut off from these resources and opportunities. Cities and towns were sharply divided along racial lines, and in the days and weeks following Dr. King's assassination, riots erupted in over 125 cities across this country. The Fair Housing Act sought to respond to those cries for justice and break down those barriers so that every American and every Hoosier had the same access to a safe place to call home and the opportunities that home presents. Good education, and it's great to be here with leader of Anderson Schools. Tim, great to see you. Good paying jobs, strong, supportive communities, hope for a brighter future. It's a lofty goal today, and a half a century later, it's still a work in progress. As I was preparing for today, I read an interview with Reverend Samuel Billy Kyles from 2008. Now, you might not know Reverend Kyles, but he was there in Memphis when Dr. King gave his final speech 50 years ago. And as he reflected on what it was like to hear Dr. King speak, and oh, how I wish I had heard Dr. King speak in person, and the progress we've made as a country since that day, he said, and I quote, "We're not going to get to the place where we can say Dr. King's dream has been realized. Now we can go to the beach." That's not going to happen. Much of it's been realized, but there is so much more to do. But each generation will have its portion, and that helps to keep the dream alive. So as I pulled up today and saw buses of young people getting off to come in here, whether it was from AU, whether it was from Liberty Christian, I just thought, this is that next generation of young people that have to do what Reverend Kyle and what Dr. King said. Each generation has its role to play. We need to be more united than we are as a people. The dream is not dead. It lives in each of us. You wouldn't be here today on this incredibly snowy day if it didn't mean something to you and our fellow citizens around the country who are also gathering to celebrate Dr. King and to participate in a National Day of Service in his honor. It's our job Everyone here, it's our job to chip away at the divisions that remain, to find the commonality, and there is so much more in common, as the pastors standing here together reminded us, and to work together to make sure that the next generation can continue our work and the work of the brave men and women who've come before us, to achieve that equality, opportunity, and strength and united purpose, because we are much better together. I want to thank you for being here today. It's my honor to be here. Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming out. The weather has been really bad so for each of you to come out here today, it's just an honor, and we just thank you once again for coming out.
Thank you for speaking. And up next, we would like to introduce Mary Ann Black from Joe Donnelly's office.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Ms. Tammy Dixon Tatum for having us here today. It's an honor to be here with you to celebrate Dr. King's birthday, and on behalf of Senator Donnelly, I'd like to offer the following remarks. Today, our country celebrates the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Dr. King was a tireless leader and pioneer in the civil rights movement who dedicated his life to working for justice, peace, and equal opportunity for each and every one of us. He led a movement that changed all of our lives for the better, and his legacy continues to influence and inspire us every day. Dr. King's insistence on nonviolent and peaceful expression should act as an example to us all. He showed us how effective we can be when we push for change, when we disagree with respect, and when we treat others as we would want to be treated. This April will mark the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's tragic assassination. As we reflect on the last 50 years, we must remember his message, the importance of service to our communities and to our country. We each have a role to play, and whether that role is large or small, we can make a difference. We can accomplish more when we work together. Thank you for celebrating the life and vision of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. today, and may God bless you, may God bless the city of Anderson, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi and Kamaya, and good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today to offer words on behalf of the state of Indiana through the Indiana House of Representatives. Let's again thank that wonderful community choir, folks from all corners of our community who came together to make such beautiful music. I am convinced that if we can bring folks together like that to produce that type of sound, there isn't anything we can't do to solve our community's most pressing challenges when we join hands and lock arms and work side by side, regardless of our ideas, values, or beliefs. Today we gather to celebrate the life and accomplishments of a man who helped to change the course of history for so many Americans. His commitment to freedom and to human rights in the 21st century are still important, but sadly, in so many ways, still not yet realized. In spite of the progress that's been made, there are still far too many who feel the sting of discrimination and bigotry. It mars our communities, our state, and our country. As I was thinking about my remarks today, I was drawn back to the speech given by Oprah Winfrey on Sunday. I thought she was magnificent in her words. She was. And while her focus was on the Me Too movement, sexual harassment and sexual assault that for decades has marred the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness for far too many citizens, and in particular, far too many women, I believe Oprah's poignant words, "A new day is on the horizon," must be as fiercely applied to our efforts to overcome the injustice of racism, discrimination based on sexual orientation, xenophobia, and economic injustice that threatens our communities, families, and indeed our country. As Dr. King so wisely said, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. In his life's own example, Dr. King symbolized what was right about America. He loved unconditionally, he was in the constant pursuit of truth, and his nonviolent campaigns brought about redemption, reconciliation, and justice. He taught us that only peaceful means can bring about peaceful ends, and that our goal was to create a community, and indeed a country, where all were loved, valued, and treated with dignity and respect. So each year on this day, let us not only recall Dr. King and his life's work, but let us rededicate ourselves to the commandments he believed in and sought to live every day. Thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Let us ask ourselves as we leave this wonderful assembly, is democracy a reality for all citizens in America today? Have I done everything I can to try to erase this scourge and make a better life for all, not just my own immediate family or circle of friends? Do all Americans have equal access to peace and prosperity? Are we confident that ours is a just and equitable society, a society of laws that respects the rights and freedoms and differences of all people? Do our children all have the same opportunity and the same chance to live with dignity and realize their God-given potential? Can all women live without the fear of unwanted advances, remarks, or threats? Until we can answer all of these questions with a resounding yes, we all have work to do. We must continue as local citizens and community leaders, as people of all different ethnicities, heritages, genders, ages, faiths, orientations, and identities, to gather, to speak, to sing, to march, and to work until we can offer the answer Dr. King was seeking. Thank you again, and let us go forward and carry on his work from today.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. We've heard it mentioned several times, I think, already that this will be the 50th anniversary that we will commemorate the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I think we need to remember what Martin Luther King was doing at the moment of his assassination. He had gone to the city of Memphis, rather, to try to bring justice, social justice, to the sanitation workers of that city who were on strike, who were trying to organize for fair wages, decent working conditions. And that struggle 50 years later still goes on. We should remember that also 50 years ago, on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, we were in the midst actually of a presidential election. And that spring. And Robert F. Kennedy was in Indianapolis and was told of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And he had to tell this news to the crowd to whom he was going to speak in Indianapolis. They had not heard that word. Well, Robert F. Kennedy relied upon the spirit and the strength of Martin Luther King to deliver a message of peace, calm, and unity. And in fact, in Indianapolis, unlike many other cities, there was peace, calm, and unity in the city of Indianapolis and throughout the state of Indiana. Now, 50 years is a long time, and we've been celebrating Martin Luther King Day now in the city of Anderson for 38 years, and we should be very proud of that fact. And I am, yes, absolutely. But we need to ask as a state, what have we accomplished in 50 years? And we certainly can't say that the job is done. As has been mentioned here today, I think by Representative Austin, we are yet to accomplish fully protecting everyone's civil rights in the state of Indiana. You can still discriminate against somebody in the state of Indiana based upon their sexual orientation, and that's not right. We need to correct that. And in the state of Indiana, we need to leave that list of only 5 states without a hate crime on the books. We need to pass a hate crime in the state of Indiana to protect all people against crimes based upon bias. Now, 50 years ago, we need to remember one other fact. As I mentioned, we were in the midst of a presidential election, and there was, of course, the usual Democratic and Republican candidates, but there also was a third-party candidate. Those of us who are old enough remember that. His name was George Wallace. He was the former governor of the state of Alabama. And he ran on a platform of white supremacy and segregation, barely disguised in her campaign rhetoric of states' rights and a motto of stand up for America. So words count. And we have to look beyond the words on the surface to what is the real message that is there. And I think many of us thought that never again would we have to face the idea of open prejudice, discrimination, and the idea that certain people are lesser because of their race, their color, their immigration status. Martin Luther King rejected those ideas, and we are here today because we reject those ideas as well. So, let me just finish my comments with one other number, and that's the number of 39. Dr. Martin Luther King was jailed 39 times because he stood up against social injustice through his means of peaceful resistance and civil disobedience. You might think after 39 times that he might have thought, well, maybe I should try a different way to approach this attitude. Maybe he would become a little bit skeptical or a little bit jaded about all this. He might question whether or not he was doing the right things in the right way. But in fact, he said this: life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are we doing for others? Let's have that be the question that we all have here as we leave today and we take with us throughout the coming year. Thank you very much, and I look forward, Reverend, to your comments today as well as we celebrate our theme of unity, too long delayed is unity denied. Thank you very much.
Pastor Sullivan has a love to motivate, redirect, and lead people. It is an honor for me today to present to you all Pastor Kenneth E. Sullivan, Jr.
Come on, can we give it up for these awesome MCs on today? This choir was phenomenal. Can we show them some more love one more time? We were blessed by you all. And this young man and his group, they did a phenomenal job. I want to recognize the mayor and all those I share the stage with. It's an honor to be here with you all. It is my privilege and pleasure to be here and to share just a few words. As I sat and listened to all of the words that were shared, I was blessed as a result of being here, hearing and seeing people of every culture and color and creed come together and to celebrate the life and the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. So it is with my great privilege and pleasure and honor to be here. I also want to recognize my wife, who is here as well. Thank God for her. She rolled with me through the snow and the sleet and the slush. And we are here. Really quickly, I just want to share this with us on today, because when we think about MLK and his life and his legacy and his contributions, I don't think it's a time for us just to look back, but I think it's a chance for us to look forward. I believe that his dream still lives on through each and every one of us who are here today. And I believe the moment that we are in right now calls for us to really ask God, what is it you want for me to do? What is it you've deposited in me? What is within my reach? Who is it that I can touch and that I can impact? And so today I want to share with you a message that I hope inspires you, and that is, you can make a difference. Matter of fact, I am a preacher, so I want you to do me a favor and turn to your neighbor and tell them, neighbor, you too can make a difference. There was a segment on NBC Nightly News a few years ago that I used to watch. And I watched the news until the end because they always had a segment on this particular news channel and show that was entitled Making a Difference. And what they would do is they would highlight the lives of ordinary individuals who used the resources that they have and made a difference in their community and their environment. They were ordinary people who took what they had and the resources they had in their hand, and with the love in their heart and the compassion for other people, they stepped outside of their own comfort zone and sacrificed to make a difference. If ever there was an individual who made a difference, that would be Martin Luther King Jr. And there's several things as we look at his life that I believe we can adopt to our own lives. First and foremost, one of the things that inspires me about Martin Luther King Jr. is that he sought to make a difference. He was literally a minister, and that word minister means to be a servant. Martin Luther King Jr. was an activist, but he was also a minister. He sought to serve other people. He used his life to impact those who were around him, and his dream was that other people could find and fulfill their dreams. I think this is important that we look at him in the light of being a servant, because we're in a day and age where everybody wants to celebrate celebrities and everybody wants success, but few people want to serve. In fact, Jesus' disciples came to him and said, we want to be great. We want to be well known. We want to be recognized. We want to be great in your kingdom. Jesus had to explain to them that the greatest in his kingdom were not those who the world saw as successful, but those who were servants. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize that we all can be great because all of us can serve. And what God wants from you and I in this season is for us to stop just looking to be successful for ourselves and not to be self-serving, but God is looking for some servants. In fact, we ought to applaud and give it up for those who on today, the servicemen and women in uniform who sacrifice on the front line to fight for our freedoms. We ought to give it up for the first responders and the paramedics. We ought to give it up for our police officers. We ought to give it up for our teachers. We ought to give it up for our nurses. We ought to give it up for our civil servants and leaders who sacrifice to serve other people. You too can make a difference. And it's the heart of God for us to use what we have to serve who we can where we are. You may not be able to change the entire world, but you can make a difference. There was a man who was walking along the beach. And when he was walking along the beach, he saw a boy who was bending over from a distance. The boy would bend over and he would pick up something and throw it in the water. And over again, he saw this boy from a distance pick up things and throw them back into the ocean. Finally, he got closer to the little boy and he saw what he was doing. And he saw this boy was picking up starfish and he was throwing them back into the ocean. There were thousands of starfish that had washed ashore. And so the man stopped him and said, "Son, what are you doing? Look at all of this. You can't possibly make a difference." The boy just ignored him and he kept picking up starfish, and he picked up the next one and told the man as he threw it in, it made a difference for that one. See, you may not be able to touch everybody, encourage everybody, change the entire world, but there's somebody you can mentor, somebody you can encourage, somebody you can lift up, somebody you can push toward their destiny. You too can make a difference. Martin Luther King Jr. sought to make a difference, but he also sacrificed to make a difference. When you look at his story, he was an absolutely brilliant man. At 15 years of age, he graduated from high school. 18 years of age, he graduated from college. 26 years old, he graduated with a PhD. He had intellectual prowess. He had gifts and talents and abilities that would have afforded him a much better life than the one he chose. But he chose to sacrifice and be a minister. He chose not only to be a minister, but to be a civil rights leader. He wasn't content to have experienced and achieved educational success for himself. He understood that he had a greater calling. And so before he graduated from Morehouse, he decided that ministry had afforded him the greatest opportunity to serve other people. He could have used his gifts to make a mint for himself, to do better for himself. He did not have to put his family in harm's way, a jeopardy, and have his home bombed, and to have calls that were threatening to he and his family, but he chose to sacrifice. He understood the principle that to whom much is given, much is required. And the reality is, for some of us who are in this room today, some of us do have greater privileges than other people. Some of us happen to have inherited certain resources that other people, you know certain people other people don't know. You walk in circles and spaces other people do not walk in. You have resources. You have athleticism somebody else does not have. Intellectual property somebody else does not have. Social and economic experiences and advances somebody else does not have. To whom much is given, much is required. And God is looking for people who are not just looking to make a dollar, but who are looking to make a difference. God is looking for people who won't just be consumers, but who will be contributors. Touch your neighbor and ask them the question, will you make a difference? Will you use the resources you have and the gifts and the talents and the treasures that God has afforded you and to contribute to somebody else? Martin Luther King Jr. made the ultimate sacrifice. He gave his own life. Jesus asked the disciples this, what manner of man is this that would lay down his life for a friend? He not only sought to make a difference, he sacrificed to make a difference, but he succeeded in making a difference. Because even after he was assassinated, his work, his life, and legacy still lives on. We're here today as a testimony of the success of his sacrifice. Not only did he succeed in his life and legacy, but Martin Luther King Jr., through the policies that he pushed and the legislation that he was able to, working with those who were in leadership, get accomplished, has made life a whole lot better for those of us who are people of color. And no, America's not perfect. It is flawed. We've still got injustices. We've still got inequalities. But thank God for Martin Luther King Jr., who began to work and help those people of color who were first going on the back of the bus, who are now able to go to the front of the bus. Before, you were denied access to universities, certain restaurants. I'm sorry, but somebody ought to celebrate on today that you can move in whatever neighborhoods you want to move to, go to whatever college you want to go to. There are opportunities that you have because he succeeded in making a difference. When I thought about it and said, wait a minute, What's so powerful about Martin Luther King? We don't know what kind of house he lived in. We don't know what kind of car he drove. He's not known for the money that he made. We don't know what kind of jewelry he had. We don't know what type of tailor-made suits he wore. But there are 900 streets in America named after him. There is a national monument to him in Washington, D.C. Every year in this country, we stop and pause and recognize a man who laid down his life to make a difference. And I want to leave you with this, that you too have a responsibility, not just to look back, but to look forward. God, what is it you want for us to do in this season with the life that we're given, with the opportunity that we have, with the privileges we are afforded? God, I want you to use me to make a difference. But before I take my seat, the only reason that Martin Luther King Jr. was able to make the impact he had because he followed in the footsteps of another king. There was another king 2,000 years ago from a dusty hilltop town called Bethlehem. He too laid down his life, but he got up on the third day with all power in his hand. He made a difference. And is there anybody here who would give God some glory because he's made the difference in your life? You ought to shout unto God with a voice of triumph. You too can make a difference. God bless you.
As we are wrapping things up, I would like to invite the Honorable Mayor Broderick up to the stage, please.
I don't blame you for skipping over. I think I'd rather sing. You know, when I looked at the program the other day, and I saw that I was about 14th, 15th down the line or something, I thought, what am I going to be able to say? Because I already knew with all these great speakers and folks that have a strong commitment towards equality that they were going to cover really probably the gamut of everything and would leave very little left to say that might be original. But as I was studying and reading some materials in preparation of this a few days ago, I learned, and I was surprised to find out, and you may be too, that Dr. King, on his famous speech that he gave on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, that he was actually listed 16th speaker that day. I don't know who the last two were, but I feel sorry for him, that's for sure. I know how they probably felt at the time. But I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank all of our dignitaries that are on stage and those that are out in the audience. I want to thank particularly Congressman Brooks for being here. She noted she's been here every year, and I appreciate the fact that she remembers Anderson in her district. I can tell you, having worked with her as mayor, that she's willing to work across the aisle and work together for the betterment of our community, the entire congressional district of which she considers us a big part of as well, and I thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge and thank also like to acknowledge and thank Senator Lannon and State Representative Austin. Both these folks, likewise, members of our State House, work hard again across political aisles, so to speak, to make sure for the betterment of our community. I think it's important that we always recognize that there's nothing wrong with having political disagreements or different ideas, different thoughts, whatever they may be. What's important is that we listen, and that we listen to each other, that we listen to all sides. Where we say there's at least two sides of the story, and quite frankly, there's usually three or four. And I think we need to remember that how important it is that we listen to each side, everybody individually, as we work together. And I appreciate the leaders, both, again, Congressman Brooks and Mr. Lannon and Ms. Austin for what they did. A lot has been said today about so many different things. We could have probably anticipated some of the words that were going to be spoken. Obviously, going back to Dr. King's famous speech in 1963, which actually was 55 years ago when that was delivered. And of course, we always have to reflect upon the tragic event of his death in 1968. What Dr. King stood for, though, as has been pointed out here on numerous occasions in different manners, is the equality and the fairness that everybody gets treated. that everybody, regardless of where you came from, what your color may be, what your political preferences may be, that we need to treat everybody in an equal fashion, and everybody needs to have equal opportunities throughout. Those of us that are, I'll be 65 in about two weeks or so. And so I grew up sort of in the shadows of the Depression that my parents witnessed all through the 50s and into the turbulent 60s. And we all witnessed long before social media and so forth. But we would all see the snippets on television of events that were unfolding before our eyes that really made it hard to believe that we even lived in America, where we'd see people being beat with nightsticks and so forth and drugged through the streets because they were trying to protest to be able to acquire rights of equality. And so when you think about leaders like Dr. King, who started well into the early 50s as a very young man, remember when he passed away, he was only 39 years of age, and how much he had accomplished in that short period of time of his life, and obviously the legacy that we've all spoken about here today that went so much longer and will go on really probably forever. But the reality is, back in those days, there was a handful of people at one point and eventually continued to grow, and there were leaders who stepped up, both white and black, who stepped up and said, it isn't right. You know, the famous words that some of which Dr. King called upon when his speech, he looked at lots of different writings in some of the eloquent speech that he gave that day, including words from the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. While we all stand firm behind that principle as part of our American creed, the reality is, of course, that was written by a man who owned slaves. And but I'm proud to say that it was white men later who sat on courts that determined that those words applied to all men, regardless of their race. It applies to all women. It applies to folks regardless of their sexual preference or whom they might love or what they might believe in. We all stand together as Americans, and the words that are put forth in those various documents that are so important to our history mean something, and they're real. And I'm proud today to stand here and with all of you, knowing that we come together as a group collectively, and I think that is really our ultimate strength that we have. And when we know and we reflect upon what's been going on in the last year or so with the White House and so forth, and some of the silliness that's come out of that it's very important that we understand that we cannot get caught up in the rhetoric of a moment of, sometimes I spoke of it yesterday and I called it of ignorance, and that's really what it is. We cannot get caught up in that. We all have to be bigger than that. We have to be better than that. We have to put away any hatred, any bigotry, any divisiveness. And our strength, and by that I mean all of us on this stage, all of us in this audience and this great theater today, our strength is the fact that we are together and that we all do understand and realize that people, while they may have different cultural differences, while we may not be perfect in many ways, the reality is we have so much more in common than we have not in common, and we stand undivided in that, and we stand together for America. Senator Lannon alluded to the remarks that Robert Kennedy made in 1968 when he flew in. He was going to be in South Bend originally for a political speech, and when he learned of Dr. King's passing, of course, Robert Kennedy was a very strong supporter of civil rights and human rights, and was a friend of Dr. King's. And when the Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1964 and signed into office by Lyndon Johnson, Dr. Martin Luther King was there. But it was Robert Kennedy really in the background in many ways through the Kennedy administration that fought hard for civil rights as well. There was always these political tensions, of course, going back and forth, but they stood up and let their better angels take over, and they did the right thing by passing that historic and that great act. And so when Robert Kennedy was flying in and learned of the passing of Dr. King, he felt it was important to go to Indianapolis, as Senator Lannon said, and speak in an area of the community that was very primarily an African-American community, was not a particularly well-to-do area of the community, and there was concern on the part of the folks that he was working with that somehow that there might be violence break out and so forth. But he said no, he understood, as Tim said, he understood that he had to deliver the word of peace He had to deliver the word that he knew that Martin Luther King would want delivered. He didn't want our city, the city of Indianapolis at that time, this community, he didn't want it to become a city on fire like so many others were at the time. And so he stepped up and he said these words that and I apologize, I'm reading from this, but I want to quote it correctly. But he said these words that I think mean something today as much as they meant then. He said, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion towards one another and a feeling of justice towards those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or they be black. And he concluded his words by calling for unity, by calling for prayer, and remembering that we are all in this together. So I would reiterate those words today. I again want to thank all of you for being here. Thank the wonderful folks that have come. Make sure you take a moment, if you haven't, when the lights come back up, and take a look at the back of the program, which has the acknowledgments of the many groups and organizations. None of this can happen without many people working together. And again, let's all continue to work together. Thank you so very much.